Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second part of a mysterious story about a father trying to save the most precious thing in his life, his son. This is part 2. Grab some tea and let's get started.
Mysterious Temple. Andrew's breath came in ragged gasps as he stood frozen before the silent warriors. His heart raced, each beat reverberating in his chest, thudding in his ears like the sound of war drums. He felt the oppressive weight of their gaze, and the sense of being prey, exposed and vulnerable. The thick jungle canopy above cast shifting shadows across their faces, making the warriors seem even more alien, more unknowable. The air was thick with the humidity of the jungle, the tang of earth and decay in the air as the warriors, silent and motionless, stared back at him. The leader, a tall man with a headdress of feathers and bones, the feathers darkened with age and weathered by the passing of time, stepped forward. His face was grim, his eyes unblinking and sharp, piercing through Andrew's attempt at composure. The leader's eyes locked onto Andrew's with an intensity that sent chills down his spine, like a predator sizing up its prey. The warrior spoke, his voice low and measured. The language was foreign, filled with clicks, guttural tones, and syllables Andrew couldn't even begin to decipher. It was an ancient tongue, perhaps as old as the jungle itself. The sound of it felt as if the very words were alive, buzzing with something dark and primeval. Andrew, feeling the weight of the situation and knowing his survival hinged on communication, held his hands up in a universal gesture of peace, showing that he meant no harm. He spoke the only words he could think of in this impossible moment. Andrew. He pointed at his chest to indicate himself. His voice was steady, though his heart was pounding. Then, without taking his eyes off the leader, he pointed to an imaginary small figure beside him, his fingers trembling slightly. Michael. My son. The words came out in a mix of desperation and hope, but they felt weak against the silence that followed. The warrior's expression remained unreadable, his face a mask of stoic resolve. Yet, there was a flicker of something in his gaze, perhaps recognition, perhaps curiosity, that seemed to stir something deep within him. He turned to the others, his voice now filled with rapid, commanding words. The warriors around him, seemingly unmoved by Andrew's plea, exchanged swift looks, and for a moment, the tension seemed unbearable. Then, without warning, the leader gestured for Andrew to follow. The other warriors closed in around him, their spears low but ready, their silent, unwavering presence making it clear that there was no room for disobedience. Andrew had no choice. If Michael was still alive, this was his best lead. His throat tightened, but he took a step forward, trying to match the warriors' swift and fluid movements as they cut through the thick underbrush. Every step felt like a struggle as his legs burned with fatigue, his body aching from weeks of survival, but he didn't dare stop. The jungle closed in around them as they moved deeper, the dense foliage pressing in from all sides. Occasionally, Andrew would catch glimpses of strange carvings etched into the bark of trees, symbols resembling the ones he had seen earlier on the obelisks. They were enigmatic, their meanings lost to time, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were more than mere markings. They were warnings. Boundaries. Markers of something old, something powerful. The journey seemed to stretch on forever. Time became a blur, the oppressive weight of the jungle disorienting him, pulling at his sense of reality. It felt as though they had been walking for hours. Finally, the dense undergrowth began to thin, and Andrew stumbled into a hidden village. The sight before him was far larger than the abandoned village he had seen earlier. Dozens of huts, some constructed from woven wood and others made of stone, surrounded a central fire pit, where meat roasted on a spit, the scent of it mingling with the earthy aroma of the jungle. Women and children peered at him from the edges of the village, their eyes filled with cautious curiosity, while more warriors stood guard, their spears never lowering, their presence an unspoken reminder that this was not a place for outsiders. At the far end of the village, rising like a dark sentinel, stood a structure unlike the others. It was made of stone, its surface covered in creeping vines and moss, giving it an ancient, otherworldly appearance. The entrance was flanked by two enormous statues of creatures that defied logic, figures with too many limbs, their forms grotesque and twisted. Their blank stone eyes gazed into nothingness, as if they were guardians of something far beyond human comprehension. Andrew's stomach twisted. He recognized the statues. The same figures had been depicted in the ruins he had discovered, ancient and terrible, perhaps even supernatural. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. Whatever was inside that temple, he knew, it wasn't meant for outsiders. The leader of the warriors gestured toward the temple, his expression grave, his jaw set as if he had already decided Andrew's fate. Then, in a single, deliberate movement, he spoke a word in English.
Inside.
Andrew hesitated, his body stiffening. There was something about the leader's tone, the weight of the word, that made him feel the immense danger of what lay ahead. Whatever was in there, it was not meant for someone like him. But Michael was still out there, and if this was his only chance of finding him, Andrew knew he couldn't afford to hesitate. He had to go inside. The temple's interior was vast, its high stone walls towering above him, the air thick with the smell of incense and the damp stone that absorbed the humidity of the jungle. Strange symbols lined the walls, glowing faintly in the flickering torchlight, their meaning as cryptic as ever. Andrew felt a strange unease settle in his chest as he moved deeper into the darkened space, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The further he went, the more oppressive the air became, as if the temple itself was alive, watching him. As he stepped deeper, his eyes locked onto a section of the wall that looked different from the rest. His breath hitched as he took in the sight. A massive map of the island was etched onto the stone, its lines sharp and deliberate, yet worn with age, filled with jagged mountains, dense forests, and rivers that snaked through the land like veins, feeding life into the island. Some areas were marked with ominous red symbols, while others bore intricate patterns resembling settlements, tribes or villages, perhaps. The map was divided into 4 distinct regions, each representing a different aspect of the island's terrain. The northern section depicted towering peaks that seemed impassable, their jagged cliffs cutting into the sky like a natural fortress. The eastern part was dense with jungle, trees standing taller than anything, a place of impenetrable green. The western side, while still lush, seemed more forgiving, with vast forests spreading out into more familiar territory. But it was the southern part of the map that caught his attention. It was different. The region was shrouded in mystery, marked only by swirling patterns and an eerie void where no landmarks were drawn. This hidden region had no name, no trails, and no indication of what lay within. The very absence of detail sent a chill down his spine. Whoever had created this map had intentionally left that part incomplete. What was so dangerous or so sacred about the southern region that it couldn't even be marked? Andrew redrawn the map on his own, the one he made, and continued studying the map, his mind racing. There were no markings for caves, an unsettling realization that made his blood run cold. The caves, which he had already discovered, were not included on the map. The absence was intentional. Someone, or something, didn't want the caves to be known. At the center of the chamber, in a place of prominence, stood an altar. Andrew's heart skipped a beat. And on that altar, lying in stark contrast to the dark stone, was a familiar object, Michael's backpack. A wave of relief and dread washed over Andrew simultaneously as he approached the altar, his steps quickening. He snatched up the backpack, his fingers trembling as he held it close. The bag was torn and dirty, its fabric frayed at the edges, but it was unmistakably Michael's. There was no mistaking the small, worn patches on the side that Andrew had sewn with his own hands during their journey. His pulse hammered in his throat as he looked around, searching for any sign of his son. But beyond the discoveries, There were no other clues about Michael's whereabouts. The only lead he had was the area he had seen marked by footprints earlier, the place where the most recent signs of activity had been. Clutching the map tightly, Andrew turned and left the temple, the weight of the backpack heavy in his arms. He retraced his steps through the jungle, his determination unwavering. The jungle seemed to shift around him as he made his way back to the place where he had seen the footprints, his only clue, his only chance. Andrew thanked the warriors for their help and set off to the place where he had last seen those footprints. To be continued.